Howdy, Nick. How are you, man?
So much better now that I got to watch that spicy intro.
How is that for a walk-up song? I thought that was pretty impressive. That, folks, is my first time seeing that. Nick, obviously your first time too, but we are here for Ion Ice Fishing Live, the first of what will be several installments throughout the ice season. I'm your host, Joel Nelson. If you don't know me, I have been ice fishing around the upper Midwest for the past couple decades and kind of making a living at it. Spending a lot of time doing writing, online TV media, things like that. I've worn a lot of hats in the fishing industry. And my goal here is to chat up some of the best and brightest we have in the sport and just talk a little bit of fishing, right? I mean, we're fishing buds, me and you, Nick. We've been out in the boat and out on the ice many times before. So that's really the goal I have today, is just talk some fishing as the excitement is kind of gathering for ice, right? We've got some cold temps coming up next week. Well, even the end of this week. And
allegedly,
reportedly and supposedly, right? We'll believe it when we see it. But as I was chatting with some folks behind the scenes here earlier, I think the goal this season, Nick, is to pile on as much ice as we can, as quickly as we can, so that we don't have to worry about it melting anytime soon, right?
Yeah, or we could get so much ice this winter that actually we can hold it over for next winter as well.
Never been done before. That would be unprecedented. Would maybe be interesting, but then again, I think the June walleye bite might suffer a little bit.
Yeah. No, yeah, I mean that would be great. You know, I'm always fighting with all of my friends and family about how cold it should be during the winter, and usually I'm on the hey, it needs to be colder side. And
right,
but I've got them warmed up to the idea that hey, let's just have it be really cold for a couple weeks early in the year, and then I'm good. That's all.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and we get picky as ice anglers, right? We don't want there to be too much snow. We need it to be cold, but then again, if it's like really frigid and windy, that's not a blast either. So we just kind of needed to be perfect. I grew up on a farm, and as a son of a farmer, I can tell you that the weather is never perfect, although we still want it to be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, so I'm looking forward to a good winter here, and I'm actually pretty optimistic. You know, some of the soothsayers are forecasting a good cold winter this year, as far as, you know, the Farmer's Almanac and the other weather things where they're saying it turns north farther west this year or something. Or
there's La Nina, El Nino, all of these things. I just learned a new weather term. The folks out west are having a bomb cyclone, which sounds unbelievable. I'm not a weather terrorist, but I do love the idea of a little bit of threatening ice early, and then, hey, we'll be ready to fish for Christmas and maybe even Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah.
But absolutely. with that, I wanted to get into Nick. Folks maybe on the Ion side that don't know you as well, it's hard to believe. Just about everybody knows you by now. I'll give Nick my intro, but I'll give some space for Nick to introduce himself a little bit. I've come to know Nick from an ice fishing perspective, but also open water. We've done a lot of video work together. Nick, you're a talented multi-species guy in the middle of the state. You spend a lot of time not just showing off the fish you catch, but showing a lot about how you catch them, which has always been the interesting part to me. So maybe give yourself a little background. Give folks a little bit of background, and I'll ask a few more questions as we go along the way. Give yourself an introduction.
Okay. I always have a hard time with this because it's like, where do you start? What do you say?
Start from the beginning. I was born on
I think I was like 7.5 pounds.
There you go.
Really, probably a cold day, December 29th.
Yeah. I'm sure it was.
No, but yeah, so I always grew up fishing. I grew up in a fishing family. My family actually grew up making fishing media. There's like one of the first TV shows that my family ever did. My dad was like 13 years old fishing with Al Linder, and I don't remember what they were catching. They were catching something. But so my family's been making media for a really long time. So naturally, I grew up fishing and just being familiar with a lot of that growing up. And I did work for my dad for a number of years as well. But now I am just kind of independently making fishing related content, mostly educational. But grew up fishing for a lot of bass, some walleye, some muskie, definitely panfish, getting out on the ice. My dad, growing up fishing with my dad, like my dad's a weird guy when it comes to ice because he's not about the walleyes. He's not really about the panfish very much. He loves to catch like catfish through the ice or whitefish through the ice. And whitefish, those were some tougher trips, but the catfish was really fun.
He's one of those ice weirdos that it's not good enough to just catch your standard walleyes, crappies, and panfish. He's got to find something cool, something niche, something interesting. And I can appreciate that. My oldest son, Isaac, is a little bit like that. We'll be on a decent walleye bite, or maybe the panfish are going, and he'll wonder if there's like sturgeon in the lake. And it just drives me nuts. But like, hey, it's what he likes, right?
Well, and what is the modern day version of that strange species that people have kind of flocked to and gotten popular in recent years too?
Oh, it's the elpout, the most frequently misspelled on the old timey online forums. There was Stugin and elpout, but definitely burbot. The eelpout has been, man, that's just kind of turned into a cult classic, hasn't it?
Yeah, the eelpout, the burbot, the cusk, the ling, the lawyer.
Yep.
The fish that's so great that they had to name it 8 times or whatever. Which I probably killed that little saying too, or whatever. But.
No, it's true. Yeah, we've got a lot of friends that love chasing those weirdos. But go back to your dad a little bit. So your dad is James Lindner, and you guys probably did a lot of bass trips as kids, open water. But what's your first ice memory? Do you remember hitting the ice when you were younger?
Well, I will say first and foremost that, like, yes, my dad, we fished quite a bit of bass because my dad is super into that. And like something that a lot of people might not know is that my dad is a really good bass stick.
Oh, he's incredible. It's ridiculous.
I just remember every summer it was like every summer there would be a new sparkly boat in our driveway because he won some tournament in June or July or whatever. But yeah, when we'd go ice fishing, I guess some of my memories, I have a lot of like pretty like significant memories of just being, 10 years old and just trudging through snow that's this deep, like pulling behind a flip over shack and then like not even really fishing in it because we don't fish outside, or inside. We like to fish outside like men.
That's right.
So I definitely have a lot of, I don't remember having snowmobiles or four-wheelers growing up. So a lot of walking and trudging out onto the lake and a lot of hard work and
hard miles. I get it for
hard
sure.
Miles, but yeah, catching fish. Yeah, like a lot of going out for catfish, or we would go out for sunfish and stuff too. So I guess that's some of the stuff that I remember. But always going out with different crews of people, and then I also remember, once I was old enough, kind of joining in on the tradition of Ontario Lake Trout Opener and going up to the woods, and that was fun. Somehow we ended up finding all of our snowmobiles for that trip. And, but yeah, I think that might be, I would say, kind of where I developed. I've never really thought back on this and kind of pondered on this, but I think that might be where I kind of developed sort of my first love for ice fishing, is, loading up the sleds. And man, the thing about ice fishing is I honestly feel like there's so much, like, to be a really good open water angler, there's a lot of different skills, finding fish, presentation, idiosyncrasies, stuff like that. But I feel like to be a really good ice angler, like the number one skill you need is just to be really crafty with your gear. And just, storing it, getting it out on the lake, transporting it, maintaining it. I feel like some of the best ice anglers are just guys who are really, really good at just sort of managing their gear. And when you're going up to Ontario and you're fishing for lake trout and you're portaging through a number of different lakes and wooded areas and just, running like 60 miles or 30 miles or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of like playing with how you're rigging stuff up onto your snowmobile. How much stuff can you get on your snowmobile? You don't want to pull behind, ideally. And you're just managing, clothing just to stay warm as possible. And so anyway, that was, and lake trout are just so fun, like they're so exciting to catch. And you catch 3 lake trout in a day. And I mean, it was just a fun day, even if it's 40 below zero and, cold or whatever. So,
I remember seeing some of those old timey Lindner photos, Al and your dad on snowmobiles, like you said, up in Canada, lake trout fishing. And you mentioned gear. And I think about the challenges we have these days with the modern gear we have. I can't imagine going back to the 1980s. I mean, I did it as a kid, but we weren't taking lake trout trips up into the Canadian Shield. That kind of deal, especially then and there, you're kind of on your own. There's no such thing as like respooling stations or I snapped a rod or my reel seat broke. Like it just, you have what you have and make a list, check it twice, and don't screw up, right? I mean, it had to be challenging, right? Back in the day. Ooh.
Oh yeah. Well, I have to throw this out too. It's too perfect. I mean, how many times do you run, 30 miles out there and back in the day, and like you had a total of 4 augers, and by the time you started fishing, you had 2 because 2 of them wouldn't start up.
Oh my God.
Like
augers.
So electric augers just made a lot of that nice. I mean, what was worse than like gas augers and trying to get those started when it's January 1st, and you're up in Canada and you're, like you said, miles away from anything and you're just pulling it a million times. And so that to me, that's a headache removed. And then there's other types of storage too, or like storage situations and gear where it's just like we've gotten more efficient and so.
Cool. I'd like to remind folks, TJ Erickson, Kyle Bouvier, and a number of others checking in over the comments section. If you have a question for Nick, you'd like me to dig it, knife it out of him, whatever I got to do to get him to answer, just let me know. Go ahead, join the chat, and add that in the comments section. We'd be happy to answer what questions we can. But Nick, you brought up augers, the elephant in the room, right? Augers. This is Ion Ice Fishing Live. I've been an Ion guy now for a couple of years. Had the pleasure of helping to work with some of the engineering staff at Artisam Ion in crafting that alpha. I take no credit other than just being happy to be a part of it, knowing it is the auger that we've experienced over the last 2 years. Maybe Nick, give me a little preview as to what brought you to Ion. If you drilled with one before. I mean, I kind of know how that story goes because I was a part of it, but I want to hear it out of your mouth too for everybody else.
Honestly, for me, it's just quality of product. I mean, I've drilled holes with all of the augers that are out on the market right now, like straight down the line. Like I've grabbed dudes' augers and punched holes, and we're out, whether it's because I want to try it or just because like we're on a fishing trip and like, hey, there's, we need a hole and there's an auger. So like I've drilled holes with every auger, and like, I guess my first time trying one was actually grabbing one of yours, funny enough. But I mean, for me, it's like, it's the quality of the product, like just wildly smooth. I just feel like I could just set it down on any kind of icy platform and just press the button and it's just going to cut smoothly through it. So for me, that's most of it, is just smoothness, speed, reliability, and yeah, just overall quality like down the line. So
yeah, I remember handing that auger to you. We were on a media trip on Mille Lacs and didn't have extremely thick ice, but I always love gauging somebody's first reaction without them even saying a word, just, seeing generally how impressed they are or are not. And it's hard to impress a guy like you that spent as much time drilling holes in the ice and fishing all over the place. But everybody talks about the speed, but you talked about the smoothness. And I think that's really important. Smoothness at breakthrough was really surprising to me when I first started using any of the green augers, right? Like it doesn't grab at the bottom and give you a jolt. It just kind of plunges through and you're like, wow, that was pretty enjoyable. On to the next hole, right? I mean, that's been my experience anyway.
yeah, well, my I had an adverse reaction to it when I drilled the first hole because my body went and like the auger didn't. I'm like, wait a second. I'm like bracing myself. So yeah, I mean smoothness to me is probably, of course reliability is always number one.
Yeah.
But smoothness to me is number two, because that means, getting torqued at the bottom of the hole or re-drilling holes. Obviously that's a big one too. And like the wheelhouse world, like I know you spend a bunch of time fishing with family and whatnot in wheelhouses and like re-drilling holes. I mean, it's a home run for that. And I also just think connecting holes, is something some folks don't think about, and is not applicable for everybody. But if you're going out and chasing predator fish like lake trout or sturgeon or big catfish, or really big walleyes or something like that, you might want to connect holes, or making like a sight fishing hole as well. So smoothness, there's like so many like applications for why something being smooth is important. So that's why it's kind of high on my list.
Yeah, no, I love it. Especially last winter, we got to see so many thaw, freeze, refreeze cycles that we ran in multiple layers of ice, ages, qualities, thicknesses. And man, that stuff just plowed right through. But then again, down in my neck of the woods, we maybe only had 4 or 5 inches of it at a time. It was not very good last year. Anyway, with that said, Mike Klatt invites you to come up and drill on Lake Winnipeg if you want to give it a real test. And yeah, we both fish Winnipeg, and boy, you get stacked ice there, you get heaves, you get all kinds of funky stuff. So that's if I can think of one place I've been to besides the rest of like crazy Canada, Winnipeg is harder on gear than just about any other place I've ever been to. I mean, I've left pieces of my truck on the lake. It just, I groan thinking about how hard that place is on equipment. Ooh.
Yeah, no doubt. I think I can knock out a couple of these questions with Mike Klatt with the Winnipeg reference, and then TJ asking number one destination for winter. And it's just, honestly, I know there's more places I need to get to. I fished kind of all over, but I think the one that's getting me like licking my chops the most is just getting back to Winnipeg. And I don't understand why I haven't just put that on the calendar as like a yearly trip where you just go to Winnipeg every year. The walleyes are nuts. Like they're just, like I want to use a politically correct word here, but they're just like, they want to hit everything,
Right.
And and it's like, I've had days out there where you're like, oh man, like, well, if the bite's tough, if I get a lethargic one coming in, I want like more of a finesse presentation, maybe something like a little larger than what we'd use at home, but more in that vein here in central Minnesota. But it's like those fish, they'll see something smaller and they'll be like, psh, and like it almost has to have more profile, so that's why like those bigger baits work, not because, oh man, just use big baits, it'll bring fish to the hole. And it's like, no, I've seen in my personal experience, and I haven't been out there a lot, like they actually prefer the larger profile and like will turn down, snuff down like smaller profiles for the bigger profiles. So That's not something you can say about walleyes in many places, you
In
know?
just about every other place, exactly. I recall a trip Roach and I took right as the world was shutting down for COVID, and we were fishing up by Gimli, and it was an off day. It was cold. Every day was warm except for the day we fished. It was a little mini cold dip naturally. Cold front Joel strikes again, as we like to call it. And our finesse presentation was big, bright, gaudy silver and neon flutter spoons.
Yeah.
So that when that's your subtle or when that's your finesse look, you're just like, oh my God, what are these fish doing? Good Lord.
Yeah. Yep. No, so I gotta get. I should just go to Winnipeg every year. But aside from that, it like just going north for lake trout is always, my favorite.
Very cool.
And then there's a million bites throughout the year. Like first ice on red, first ice on Mille Lacs, first ice on or early-ish ice on Devils, and there's a bunch of really fun things to do. And
So I had an interesting question for you based on first ice. Guys like myself, guys like you, a lot of times we're trying to gather a variety of content, or more appropriately, we're just fish heads and interested in catching lots of different species in the winter. But it can be tougher later midwinter for certain species, obviously, right? So first ice, are you trying to scratch the itch for eyes or for gills? Or is it just opportunistically based on where your trip is going, what's going on in the local area? But like, let's say somebody gave you an assignment this winter. I need you to catch a bunch of big gills on camera. Are you doing that early ice? Are you doing that midwinter? Like what's your pattern and plan there?
Okay, so here's how I think about it. So are we gonna say the species are walleye, panfish, other? Is that
Yeah.
kind of the thought?
Yeah. Let's do that.
I would say for walleye, you got to get out there early. And like, so for instance, like I've done a lot of filming and whatever. And I like to mostly just do a lot of walleye stuff throughout the course of the year. As much as I can. Like I really enjoy walleyes, and I enjoy like kind of the challenge of them. But if you needed to collect a number of videos throughout the course of the year, like, I've done for different years, or for many years, you got to get out early for walleye. And the main reason why is because you cannot get out late for walleye where we live. Late ice would be amazing too, but probably more than any other species, walleyes get extremely difficult to catch in the middle of winter. So make hay early on in the season. And then for panfish, I've done like super early ice for panfish, and I've kind of found that is like often kind of hard.
I agree. You're singing my tune, man. I agree completely. Sometimes medium early is good for bluegills.
Yes.
Get a little bit of ice on that lake, maybe a little snow, cuts down on some light penetration. Maybe we're talking 4-wheelerable stuff, 6-8 inches of ice.
Yeah.
That tends to be my favorite period for gills as well. But just like walleyes, the hard part with gills is they get real. I mean, big ones anyway. They get real tough midwinter too, right? Like they just
definitely, yeah. Midwinter is hard for gills too. It's just or panfish, I guess, hard for panfish too.
Yeah,
it's just less hard, than walleye. But actually, I wouldn't even say early ice. I wouldn't even really say that's when I'd like to target panfish. Even like late early ice. Like for me, my very, very favorite is late ice.
Yeah.
And like the predator species are closed here in Minnesota when we get to that time of year. But that's not the main reason. I just feel like once you start getting snow melt, that's when it starts to get really good for panfish.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
super consistently good, whereas I feel like early ice is less consistent. Even, once you've gotten past like that very first, phase.
It's interesting. I think back to, I grew up fishing a lot of small farm ponds, and the bluegills until January were running for their lives because bass, I think the water was still just a little bit warmer under that first ice, and the bass were relatively active until after kind of January 1st. And those gills, man, I mean, they were getting picked off left and right. That's, in those farm ponds, that's what the bass ate, even in the winter. So I think that makes sense in a lot of predator-prey relationships, whether they're talking about pike eating them or bass or whatnot. But all right, you answered my question there. But you're not just an angler. You're not just a content creator. You're kind of an innovator on ice. I've seen you do some really interesting things. You've learned a lot from the filming side of things. I liken it kind of to tournament angling, where it's like you've got a job to do. You're trying to do well. So you have to come up with like crafty tricks of the trade as you go along, because striking out on these big trips, like, it's not an option. It's just, it's tough to travel a long distance only to not get it done, right? So
it happens sometimes, though.
It's naturally going to happen. I think a lot of people think that we just always go out and kill them. And what's more typical, I tell people, is that we go out and we work hard, we catch a couple, we learn a little bit, and maybe by the end of the day, we're killing them, right? It's rare you can stroll out there and beat them up. But my question, as long-winded as it is you've had to come up with some strategies that are a little bit different. Name your best strategy right now, something you want to employ right away, first ice. You've learned a lot from forward-facing sonar. That's in most of your videos. But go ahead and get me kind of your number one go-to for once you stroll out for, let's say, first ice walleyes. Right now, what are you going to hit, and what are you going to focus on for a strategy? Lay it out for me, will you?
All right. Let's see. I'm trying to think if I have any sneaky little tricks.
You do. You can share.
Okay, so I would say for walleyes, walleyes are so interesting, and they're so different based on where you're fishing them. Honestly, the trick is just like getting to safe ice on early ice, and just getting out there and taking advantage of the bite windows. I don't know who coined this term, but the first time I had heard it was from our buddy Brett McComas, is the flash bite. I mean, walleyes are so bite window oriented. And just taking advantage of the bite windows is really critical when it comes to walleyes, all season long, not just early in the year. But there's a number of things, like on many of the lakes that we'll fish around home that are these clear bodies of water, maybe deep bodies of water. You just get to where you can get to safely and get out there, set up camp. I think like utilizing all the lines that you have available to you is really big too.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, like when I use live scope, I'll set up like a set line. Like I'll set up in a spot. I'll pick an area first of all, and then you want to kind of figure out all of the best potential spots to fish within an area. Because when you get there, you want to grab your auger and you want to pop holes right away when you get there. You don't want to waste any time, because you don't want to be drilling when the fish are potentially going to be biting. So you want to get there before they bite. I guess one little trick that we've been doing the last couple of years is actually using forward-facing sonar to find kind of the exact spots where you should be putting these holes. So in some cases that might mean popping holes that are this far from the weed edge or this far from the weed edge, just so you can be really precise about where you're jigging. You're not just guessing, drilling a bunch of holes, and one of them is 25 feet off and the other one is 3 feet in the weeds. So using forward facing to kind of get really precise with where you put those holes. So that might be a weed edge, that might be a boulder that's in the area. It might be, just a structural change. So getting out early and once you're out early, drilling those holes and then setting up kind of your deadlines in areas that are different from where you're setting up jigging. So the best way you can do it is if you got two guys. So
Oh yeah.
in Minnesota, you can have two lines. If you just get out by yourself, you can definitely cover a little bit of ground. You can kind of move that dead stick around a little bit and move your active jigging rod around a little bit. But if you have two people, you can have four lines. So that means you can have one set up on the weed line, one set up, on some inside corner thing, and, maybe one set out way deeper. And then you can have you and your buddy kind of hopping around trying to figure out within that area, where are you marking fish? And that's another one of the beauties of forward-facing sonar as well, is just the fact that you have more data. You can be checking those set lines, seeing if anything's looking at your minnows that you got swimming around down there. And you can also, like, if you have a traditional sonar setup, you can see some of the fish that come in, but you're not going to see all of them. So you kind of garner some more confidence in the area that you're in because you are seeing some fish. And honestly, oftentimes when you're talking about walleyes, and especially when you're talking about clear bodies of water, it's more important to be where there are fish than it is to actually be catching fish. Because once they start biting, you're in the area and you're around them, and you don't want to waste time traveling to another area and drilling that area out just to find out that there's also some walleyes there, like you didn't improve your situation much and you wasted a lot of time when you could have been getting bit. So yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the lakes like that will fish around home, but if you're going to Red Lake on early ice, that's a whole nother deal. I mean, if you can use a snowmobile to travel and lug your gear around early, snowmobiles you can get those out pretty early versus like wheelers and stuff like that. You can use that to get away from the crowds a little bit more. And, some of these lakes have really, really, even dirtier lakes like Red have really, really phenomenal night bites. So that's one thing I like to kind of take advantage of too, is just sticking it out a little bit longer, setting up the fish house. Maybe you're fishing outside all day because whatever, you're just jumping around and you're fishing outside, but having the fish house and the heater ready so you can stay out till midnight. And you'll oftentimes find that if you catch 4 or 5 fish during the day running around, it's kind of a crappy day. That would be kind of a crappy day on Red. That would actually be a reasonable bite on some other lakes or whatever. But you might find that you'll catch 17 between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. The flurries can just happen later in the evening on a lot of different lakes. So I like to think about that a lot as well. And yeah, just playing with presentation. What do you do on the ice? You can go pretty deep, right?
I do everything on the ice, whatever it takes, right? Throw the kitchen sink at them. In many respects, we're mad scientists and lab coats that are just trying experiment after experiment till the fish tell us that, hey, you're doing something right. So keep doing that again and again. But so many things you brought up in that last little bit of dialogue. I love the idea of using live scope or underwater cameras, whatever, to really dial in the exact spot on the spot. If you've ever fished cribs, like the 3 feet is the difference between like marking them constantly and catching them constantly.
Yeah.
And so that exists in natural lakes and weed bed edges and beds, small changes in substrate alike. So I think that's a really good point. And then you brought up Upper Red Lake, and you probably figured I was going to give an Onyx Fish plug in here somewhere. But if you haven't been an Onyx Fish, go in there and check out Upper Red Lake on recent aerial imagery. And you can go back to last winter and see like every 5 to 10 days the shots. And there is one zone in the lake, and I'm not going to tell you where it's at, but it literally got no road pressure. There were no fish houses on it. It looks to be like a 8-mile wide by 3-mile tall swath of the lake where I'm guessing there were challenges in getting out to it. I'm sure there were pressure ridges, cracks, heaves, but you talk about a lake like that. It's about getting away from people, and
Definitely.
we're talking about using tools and being innovative and finding different ways to get going on fish. But going back to forward facing, I have thought of you as one of the early adopters that has spent a lot of time. You see Mike Klatt saying everyone saw the live scope overlay on your videos, such a slick video trick. I agree, but I've been in the boat with you using live, and we've done it on ice too. And I know that it increases your learning like exponentially. It shortens and sharpens that learning curve so quickly. Maybe tell me a little bit about ice and using live scope for the fishing aspect. Some of the learnings that you've had just last ice season alone. Let's say walleyes, it's a popular topic. Like I see on your videos how fish react to your baits. I know you start to see patterns and realize that this isn't just a one-time thing. It's not just a today thing. These are things that I'm seeing consistently. So I don't know if there's any insight there that you can share, or if it really is just a situation by situation basis. You let me know.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would say it's a really neat tool for just observing fish. And I've always had, sorry, I just got caught up reading some of the comments. So Matt,
I know.
he asked, do you think forward facing or live scope spooks fish? And I don't know how anybody can claim that they actually know that. There's so many factors. Like, oh, well, fish are afraid of boats too, and if your live scope's on your boat, like as they get closer to the boat, they're getting closer to the anyway. It's such a good learning tool, and I wouldn't say it like really super dramatically increases your catch rate on the ice, because a fish has to swim to you and bite your lure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you're going to garner more information. You're going to garner more confidence in the area that you're fishing. You might be able to be more precise with where you're setting up your deadlines and stuff like that. But you really learn a lot about the fish's behavior when you have that different viewing system. It's kind of actually the same as like if you use underwater camera a lot, you watch the way the fish moves and like looks at the bait. And when you drop it down and you see them give like a little extra kick towards it, you see the things they like a little bit better. So I would say it's helped me kind of refine my presentation. I feel way more when you're just looking at like 2D sonar, you don't feel as confident about jigging high up off the water column or high up off the bottom, higher in the water column. Because every time you mark a fish, it's right on the bottom, right?
Sure.
At least it appears to be. And but when you have a larger field of view, you can see just the way these fish are moving around and kind of. I feel like I would rather jig halfway, in the middle directly in the middle of the water column than directly on the bottom, because more fish are going to see you. The active fish that are actually swimming around and looking to eat something are going to see you. So I feel like I have more confidence fishing higher in the water column. I also feel like I kind of understand that this is going to sound super elementary, but in practicality, like there's some kind of utility to it. And that's like, there's going to be fish that are going to bite, and then there's going to be fish that aren't going to bite.
Yeah.
And like, you can just tell by their body, as soon as they're showing up on the corner of the screen, like you can just tell by their body behavior that like, yeah, that fish probably won't bite. I mean, we're going to work and try to catch it, but like just understanding that, you didn't do something wrong. That's just, the most lethargic fish,
Right.
So just kind of using that data to kind of like dial in your presentation, and it's just easier to see with your eyes and understand what's happening.
Yeah. So speaking of forward facing again, to you, does it replace a flasher? Or do you still utilize a flasher with forward facing? Or are there certain species that you would still utilize a flasher for? Or, because I see a lot of people going in to buy forward facing to get rid of their flasher. In your opinion, is that a good move? Does that make sense? Does it make sense for you?
Sometimes, yeah. I would say sometimes it replaces it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it just depends on where you're fishing, what you're doing. So if I'm just kind of sitting there, for the most part, maybe hop holes here and there, and I'm not like hand-to-hand combat fishing, I can just have live scope down and that's fine, but if you're like chasing panfish and you're doing a lot of hole hopping and, oftentimes, oftentimes a flasher is complementary to a live scope setup. So, you're talking basin crappies, you're talking panfish, you might be talking Winnipeg. In some cases, like on Winnipeg, guys will, Mike had mentioned it in the comment section already. They'll drill a hole and then they'll put forward facing sonar down, and then they'll have more holes around, and they can kind of, oh, there's one, because those fish are, it's a kind of a flat, big, flat area, and those fish are just kind of roaming around. And like, if you can get your bait closer to that one, then, where you're already at in the hole, you might as well go do that. So in that case, I think oftentimes you can grab, a little Markham unit or something and run over and drop your flasher in the hole. And like, you can be way more quick and efficient. It beats grabbing the whole live scope unit out of the hole and running over to that next hole. So I think there is still plenty of utility for it. But yeah, I guess that's kind of how I like to think about it. I think it can be complementary. Other times you just use your live scope unit. And so, I mean, a lot of people just sit in wheelhouses all winter. It's like, yeah, that's fine. You don't really, it just depends on how you fish.
I like it. What's up, Carlo? Thanks for checking in. TJ comes back with another burning question. Is the mustache making a comeback this winter? I've seen various forms of the Nick Lindner mustache. It's yeah, exactly. Yeah. Tell your fans, inquiring minds want to know.
It's just a feel thing, Yeah.
You wake up one day and just I'm not shaving for a while.
A lot of times it's like while I'm sculpting my face, I'll look at it and I'll be like, ooh, this feels right. I think I can leave the mustache on. So that's all it comes down to.
Jordan, your wife has no say over this. This is just you making a unilateral decision, and he lives with it, or what?
Oftentimes she encourages the behavior. So
she's an instigator. Okay, we got to work on that. I don't know if that's a good thing. So, all right. I had a question for you regarding augers and first ice. Have you used a drill adaptable auger? Have you used anything like that? Do you prefer that for early ice, for drilling less ice or panfish? Or are you just like a dedicated full, power plant with an auger bit on top of it, like the Alpha?
I like, if you're walking out onto the ice, I think the drill is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's okay. But I also think that Alpha is so light that you could just throw that in your sled too. So I think there's some utility for the drill in those situations. I'm not afraid to use a drill in super thick ice, but it's definitely nicer when it's less thick,
My kids love the pistol bit, and I think the reason is because of what you pointed out. A lot of times they've got a hub and a sled, and they're pulling that thing out onto the ice, and man, they can just zip holes. It is wild. it's not a chore anymore. I remember a time where you didn't want to be the drill guy. That was the He-Man that was lugging around a 44-pound Jiffy and fighting to start it and fighting even harder to get holes punched with it. So yeah, I like the drill adaptables. They've grown on me for sure.
Yeah, and I would say I was probably at one point in the never drill camp.
Yeah.
Where I would probably never use like a little handheld drill, but I like it now to some degree. But I would say like 80% of applications probably I would for sure want like something like the Alpha.
Sounds awesome. Yeah. Tell me this. What shows do you have coming up that you're going to attend? Are you going to be at St. Paul? I assume that's like the Super Bowl of ice fishing, right? So you'll be there. Any other shows you got coming up? You'll be working?
Yeah, I'll definitely be at St. Paul for the entirety of the show. And I would say, I guess I don't really know what I'm going to be doing there per se. But I might spend some time, well, in a number of booths, probably mostly, I would say mostly in Northland's booth.
Yeah.
But I'll be jumping around all over the place. And then actually I'm going to be in at the Duluth show on Saturday.
Oh, well. Nice.
So
very cool.
Kind of like a fill-in.
Is that the weekend following? I don't remember. Yeah, weekend right after. Yeah.
Right after St. Paul.
That's kind of the deal. We work at these ice shows and then try to fish in between when we can, right? That's kind of the gig. Yeah, speaking of St. Paul, a tip for everybody. If you order a pizza via, what is it? Was it, I don't remember what the service was, but if you order it at 1, it might not get there till 3. So just a heads up for anybody down in St. Paul. Like if you're using DoorDash, these things can happen. So
yeah, I found a really good strategy in St. Paul when you're there is to eat food when the restaurants are open.
Amazing. Yeah. Don't wait till late. That's not smart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those of us, for those of you that are going down to St. Paul, always a good show. Great to see what's out there. The Ion booth always has the engineers and the factory reps, which I love chatting with those guys because like if you're one of those Tom Tinkerer types, or you like looking at that and say, what did they use a hex bolt there? Those guys will give you the answer for that. Sure. If you say, what's the deal with the lights underneath and why do they stay on as long as they do? They'll give you an incredibly long and well thought out answer. So I don't know. I nerd out on fishing gear a little bit, and those are my guys. I like going around and asking those kinds of questions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Is that are there any geeky things I can ask you while we're on the air?
I don't know. Regarding the auger itself, not a lot. I love the battery guard, which is kind of crazy, but like the batteries are expensive, and I'm not it's not like I'm worried about dropping the auger on the battery that much and ruining the battery, but like there's just little things, the way that there is metal on the outside edges of the handles, just enough where if you hit a hard surface, it wouldn't damage the handle itself. There's just those are the things that I pick up from those guys that I think that are really cool to ask.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Tell me this, Nick. You get done with the ice shows, you're going to go back and fish locally for the most part, or you got a big trip or two planned at the outset? What's your program so far?
I would say I'm thinking I would get to Red Lake before the ice show, I think. So in theory that will happen, and if it doesn't happen, then I'll be going to Red Lake after the ice show.
Yeah.
I guess we'll see what happens. But
right.
And then after that, like I definitely have like a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks where I try and get back up to red, maybe, but definitely spend some time on Mille Lacs, depending on whether or not that froze up. That's definitely a decent bit behind Red Lake. But early ice on Mille Lacs, when you get like just a few of those good cold nights, you can freeze up good enough to get out there. And like the very, very, very earliest bites on Mille Lacs it just seems like always the best. Like it's just mad. And the fish there's so many fish in that lake. I mean, it's such a great, an incredible lake. And I mean, the only downside is that there's also a bunch of forage right now too.
Sure.
So it can be difficult, but early ice fish are always pretty willing participants. And when you go out on Mille Lacs, unlike Red Lake, when you go on Mille Lacs, like you definitely could catch some bigger ones. And those fish, they're built and they're hungry and they're fun. And I mean, well, last year we caught them on rattle baits like consistently. Like that was a great pattern. A few of the times we were out there, we actually did a live stream out there doing that. So that was neat. So I'll definitely be getting to Mille Lacs for sure. Probably seems like the St. Paul Ice Show, like you're usually on Mille Lacs like the week after that show, at least the early ice Mille Lacs, like walk out in Mille Lacs.
Tell me this, you catch a lot of walleyes. Do you like eating fish? Do you like eating walleyes? If so, how do you make them? What's the favorite for you or the family or all the above?
I mean, I guess I would say we don't eat a lot of walleyes. My wife is kind of like, oh man, I don't want to do walleyes. We have to, deep fry everything. And she thinks it's too stinky. And I guess the moral of the story is I need a deep fryer that I can keep outside.
Yeah.
So that want to eat walleyes with us. So like I have fish sometimes and I don't do anything special. I just kind of fry them up and, just use whatever batter, whether that's catch and cook or just kind of breadcrumbs and blah, 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 stuff like that. So, so that's, I don't have anything special to share on that. Hey, I love fish tacos. That's a good,
Who doesn't, right? Fish tacos are awesome. So you fish with the famed and mysterious Mr. Brent McComas. Is Brett going to be joining you on any film sessions upcoming in the early part of the year? Because knowing you guys, it's always fun seeing both of you fishing together. Has Brett signed his contract for 2024-25 Nick Lindner ice season? Like, is he signed on? Like, is this going to happen as a real thing or no?
Always by the seat of the pants. Brett's
maybe not kind of a deal.
We'll do some stuff together for sure. But I mean, I would imagine we'll get up to Red and fish together. We'll for sure fish on Mille Lacs together. I would say if you want to see some Brett, I mean, go follow Brett's stuff. But me and Brett will probably be doing some fishing together on Mille Lacs. That seems like that's kind of at least a bare minimum doing that is kind of a tradition. So
it's more fun seeing you together. Sometimes it's a little bit like an old married couple. Every once in a while you guys slip into that, which I think that's a lot of fun for me anyway.
Yeah.
So
we did a live stream last year and I'm sure that was entertaining for folks who we're always chirping each other and we're comfortable and know each other's limits. So
where to draw the line. Matt Halverson asks, most holes you've ever drilled in one day. Is there a bite that you remember where you just peppered holes into the horizon?
Yeah, the worst of all bites. I actually think the day that we drilled the most holes ever, in my experience, was a day where we didn't catch any fish, literal zero. And that was one of those awesome bites that we were talking about earlier in this discussion was early ice panfish, just the worst. So that was up northern Minnesota. I think we fished 3 lakes that day, and I guess I don't know how many we drilled, but it must have been like 120 maybe, but I would say 98% of the time I wouldn't drill more than 20 holes, 15, 20 holes would be pretty normal. but yeah, I mean, that's probably the most I've drilled in a day was that day. So
you describe some Dakota's bites that I've had where you're hunting small sloughs, but small lakes are the same way. And the problem with small lakes is you're just cocky enough to think that if you would just drill it out a little more, I'll find them. If I just drill another 50, they got to be in here somewhere, right? Like that's the temptation. So
maybe they're not though.
Most times when it's off, it's really off. A lot of times they really are not.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I have maybe just one or two more questions for you. Nick, if you think of anything that's a burning hot topic you want to address either from the comments or something you wanted to share with folks just before we start diving into ice season.
Yeah. What did you think about the election?
Right. Yeah. Can we bring up any divisive topics that would scare viewers away and make sure nobody ever tunes in again? Good work. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Let's hear it. What else you got, Joel?
I was wondering, I've been seeing you do a lot more dead sticking, and I know it's something that all of us do a fair amount of. But when you're fishing early ice eyes, for the most part, are you catching them jigging, dead sticking, or is it a healthy combination of both? Because it sometimes seems like I'm tempted to think at times that it's almost like 2-to-1 dead sticks on a lot of bites. But then you go out and you slam them jigging and you're like, why do I even mess with these dead sticks? So like that's been the mind, just the mind cluster for me trying to get over that and think about how fishing early ice goes, right?
Man, I would say I would love to actually record all of my catches and know that for a fact.
Right.
But I would say like where I live in Minnesota and a lot of the lakes I fish, it's gotta be like roughly 50-50, I would say.
Really? Nice.
Yeah. Like seems like it's a complete dead split. And it also seems like the vast majority of days you catch 80% or more of the fish doing one of those two things. So like what I mean by that is like some days it seems like 85% of the fish will come on dead sticks. And then you'll go out another day, it might be the same body of water, and every single fish you catch will be active jigging. So I don't really have a good, way to explain it. It just seems like usually it's one way or the other. Of course, there'll be days where it's like you caught 6 of them jigging and 5 of them on dead sticks or whatever. But it seems like more often than not, it's one way or the other on any particular day.
The general consensus then would be that by not doing both, you're potentially really hurting yourself badly. So like you kind of need to carry the gear out, do it right on both accounts.
Yeah.
To account for those 85% days you may be really missing out on, right?
Undoubtedly. And I mean, like you've been a dead stick, like you've preached dead sticking for a really long time. Like you've been super in the dead stick realm of things. And I would say one of the reasons why dead sticks are great is because it's so quick and easy. Like you can just actually bring a bucket there and set a dead stick on there.
Yep.
I've been using a lot of finicky foolers too. Some folks will, use iFish Pros, but I love the finicky fooler because it's so compact.
Yeah, and it's tiny.
You can just throw it in, throw it in a tote or whatever. Throw it in your box. And I just feel like it's pretty quick and easy to use and set up. And actually one thing that I've been doing a lot, and I talked about it a little bit this last winter, and I'll probably talk about it more in the future, is drop shot. So I've actually made my dead stick setup. I'm pretty much exclusively now doing a drop shot setup with that. And I could talk about that probably for the next 15-20 minutes.
Dirty. I like it.
That's an efficiency thing. So now I don't have to bring my flasher over there. I can just put a minnow on the drop shot hook and send that weight down to the bottom. And I know that the hook is going to be this far off the bottom.
What size weight for most applications are you running? Because you got to think of a walleye dragging this thing away. You don't want him to feel too much weight, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it probably doesn't matter. But I would say, yeah, it doesn't hurt to be lighter. I would say just enough to keep that, shiner, sucker, fathead or whatever from swimming away. So like a quarter ounce is probably, sufficient or more than sufficient. An eighth might be fine too, but yeah, that doesn't need to be very much.
Right. I like it. A lot of guys talk about using drop shots for panfish and weed situations, keeping that bait up and out of any kind of vegetation. But I love hearing using it on dead sticks for efficiency, because you're right. A fish takes the bait, having to reset everything, make sure you're in the perfect portion of the water column. Like, all that is that's a time suck. And you talked about flash bites, man. Like, I've been saying for years, have multiple sticks ready, because when that time is going, you can't have your line in the water enough. Like, you just can't. It's impossible. So,
well, so like the importance of having that set line out there is critical, and the biggest obstacle to using a set line is just the time and effort it takes to set it up. So anything that you can do to be more efficient, whether that's, using a dead stick versus having to set up, whatever other mechanism you like. And alternatively, and additionally, using a drop shot, you don't have to worry about, figuring out how far it is off the bottom, whatever. These are just they're all just efficiencies that, the best way to have good habits is to make the habits easier, and make your, drop shot or your dead stick habit easier by just making it more efficient.
Are you using bait feeder reels? I know you are. Which ones are your favorites, or do you have a couple favorites?
I have been using bait feeders. I'm sort of I'm kind of on the fence with them, where I've been playing with them, and normally in normal situations, I think a bait feeder is a good prospect. But with that said, some of the devices that you can use, like the finicky fooler, I'm using a lot.
Yep.
I don't think a bait feeder is really necessary, and I found myself kind of opening the bail a lot with those now too. So, but there's not very many good bait feeders on the market, really. I mean, what would you say are a few of your favorite?
I think it's kind of the obvious ones, right? It's the CMAR or SAMAR, and it's Big or Little Brother. I'm forgetting the name of it. I own both. It's tough. Well, I mean, those are the primary ones. I'm sure there's other oddballs out there. It's hard because when you've got an active bite going on and it's cold out, you get splash and you get condensation and snow. Mm-hmm. And all of the reasons why an ice fishing reel doesn't work in the winter, it's amplified in a bait feeder when you really need that thing to free spool, and it doesn't because of conditions. It's really frustrating. So yeah, that's why I was interested in that question, to see if interesting that, kind of independently arrived at the same conclusion with some of that stuff. Sometimes it's good, and then other times it's a pain in the butt. But
I think a lot of what it comes down to for me is just having a really high quality reel more than anything, and a well greased reel. And for me, I'm using open water reels, for the most part on ice, and that's a big one. I think people could take away is there are still some people that feel like they need a 500 size reel or a 750 or something like that. And for me, 1,000 size reels are kind of not the new. I mean, that's just what I use. And that's what people should be using. 1,000 size reels are the new ice reels in my eyes. But using
bigger spool, less memory on the line. There's a lot of positives, right? A lot of good things to think about there.
Yeah, the size of the arbor on the reel is critical just for line twist and stuff like that. But overall, just open water reels tend to you'd think ice reels would just be dialed for ice, but oftentimes they're just cheaper and lower quality. So it's just the higher quality of the reel, the better it's going to work when it's freezing out. So that's kind of where I go with it.
Agreed completely. So tell me this, last question. You got to do some ice fishing exploration this year. We go to a lot of the same destinations. I'm just as guilty as the next person. But if it's between the Dakotas and Wisconsin, where are you going? Now, keep this in mind. This may sound like an easy one. Everybody's like, well, the Dakotas, obviously, it's more remote. There's crazier bites out there. But I still think that some portions of down home, middle of nowhere, Wisconsin are threateningly good. And now with things like Onyx Fish and more information, like you have better chances of figuring things out over there than maybe you would in the Dakotas. But I kind of want to hear your reasoning and your thoughts. No wrong answer, obviously. The Dakotas or Wisconsin, would you go? We'll keep Canada out of it because, of course, Canada is going to be awesome. Yeah, just go north. That's always that's always the pat answer. But if you had to go east or west, which way would you go?
That's tricky. So I've spent a little time doing some sloughs in the Dakotas. I've spent a little time on Devils. I haven't gone past that. Like, I would really love to go to Sakakawea, or even Oahe, stuff like that. But it's like, I kind of feel like both, like close, like even, because like if you go east, I've spent a little time on Lake Superior, when they get ice up there, and that's such a fun bite. But and once again, like on like the bigger water side of things, Green Bay, I have to fish Green Bay. I mean, that's just like it's on the bucket list. I don't think they catch a lot of fish out there, but they are so big and so, I mean, they just catch awesome fish, awesome walleyes out there. But with that being said, like, so I've done a lot of experimenting this last summer. You'd kind of mentioned some of the smaller lakes and just being able to do research and finding some of these small lakes. And like, I've always thought about that with panfish, where you're looking at the survey data and you're trying to find lakes that have big crappies and big bluegills and stuff like that. But I started doing that this last summer. And actually, like you said, on the Onyx Fish app, looking for lakes that specifically have really large walleyes and going out and trying to target them. And I found a number of lakes in kind of my general neck of the woods where the survey data would indicate that there is some trophy potential and going out and capitalizing on that trophy potential. And just like having that data in like an app form where you can kind of sort through it and look for certain criteria of things just makes it like way faster, because I used to always go on like the DNR website and looking through all that kind of stuff, and you just have to guess like, oh, I'm going to look at this lake and let's see what this is. So going on having an app to be able to sort through that, it gets my brain kind of spinning and excited to just like look at more small, and not even small lakes, but like even just moderate sized lakes is kind of I found to be really critical. So yeah, I mean, Wisconsin, honestly, Minnesota too, there's just like a lot of lakes I want to check out now. But I would say between like the smaller lakes in Wisconsin, where it's just going to be easier to find info now, and like Green Bay, like I think I'm more excited to go east. And I would say like the last 3 years, I would have been more excited to go west.
Sure.
And I've spent more time going west the last few years. I've spent more time at Devils and stuff like that. So that's kind of a long-winded answer and way to say that. Yeah. Both.
All of the above. Both. Yeah. I would like to spend a little more time out west. It's been a while since I've been out there, but just flood cycles. You get certain lakes, big lakes that spill over and seed all these little sloughs, and it may be only once every couple of years that it happens. But it's enough to make a bite out of nowhere. And that's the kind of promise that like anglers love, because it's like this Christmas present, right? It's like, or this thing, it's like finding a diamond. It's just for me, you know, it's like, I found this. How cool is that?
Yeah.
You kind of have that to yourself, at least for a little bit. So I think that's
for sure. Well, I've spent so much time like gearing up and rigging up, and I spent a lot of time this fall, like kind of re-rigging my snowmobile a little bit too.
Cool.
Not as much as I want to. There's still more things I want to do, but I'm excited to go north, you know, like a lot of stuff around home and whatever. It's like, you could just get out and pull some stuff out on a sled, but like, I'm excited, like being rigged up to like kind of, you know, go out into the wilderness and
tackle the big stuff
there.
I love it. Yeah. We'll use Carlo to give us one last question each. It says, what's both of your favorite species to fish for? Nick, go for it.
I will give a couple prefaces, honorable mentions, and then I'll give my favorite.
I like it.
So I love the challenge and the reward of chasing walleyes. I love the uniqueness. I love the fight. And I just love how super fun eelpout, burbot are. And actually catfish for similar reasons, you know, just a species that's really fun to tangle with. But God, I mean, I think the king for sure through the ice for me is lake trout.
Nice.
They're so fun to catch. They're so fast. They're so aggressive. They can be very, very giant, but like a lake trout that's like this big is just awesome. You know, like that's super, super fun and enjoyable to catch too, you know? And it's like, I can't tell you like catching like a cigar walleye is like that fun, you know?
Right.
But even a dink lake trout is going to come up, scream up 100 miles an hour, crush your bait. But you get a big one and it's going to come just as fast, maybe faster.
Right.
And then you set the hook and it's like, it doesn't even move, you know, and then it'll like scream off and fight you for 5+ minutes, you know? So
awesome.
I love lake trout. So there's no other answer. So I don't even know what you're going to say, Joel.
You took all the good ones. It's over. Yeah. It's funny you say that, because you're right. Lake trout for a lot of people are out of sight, out of mind, because if you don't live near lake trout, you're thinking like, well, what the hell, you know, this is like a bucket list trip, but
yeah.
So I get that. For me, mine's just going to go back to nostalgia, which is teasing big bluegills, like really big bluegills. I hate them and I love them all at the same time. I don't do it as much as I used to. But man, I used to love beating my head against the wall trying to get a big ass bluegill to eat, when they'd love to come up and just blow on the bait and suck it in and spit it out. And
bluegills are kind of my least favorite, almost.
Because of that, probably, right? Like they can
work so hard to catch. There's actually probably not a harder species to catch than bluegill. Even when you know where they are, like they're so hard to catch. You have to work so hard for them. I'm not saying you're going to go out and catch more walleyes in a day than bluegill, but like, you know, if you're going out and targeting big ones, they are so sight oriented and they're so particular. Your presentation has to be so dialed. You can throw a hunk of meat and have it get tangled up and a walleye will still crack it.
Yeah.
You know, but like a panfish, if like your plastic is like spinned like 25 degrees off, it's like they're going to come up and look at it and they're going to be like,
I quit.
I'm out.
What's my soul? Yeah, that's like I said, I love them and I hate them, but I think it's when you've caught a great big bluegill, especially under tough conditions, you've really done something. I think it's pretty awesome. It's a true trophy. So, Nick, final. Are you going to Athapap again this winter?
Athapapiscow. TBD. I would. I really, really, really want to, but I also really, really, really wanted to go to Winnipeg again last winter, and I went to Athapapiscow last winter. So I want to. We'll see. TBD. I'm definitely going again. but I'm not 100% sure if it'll be this winter or not.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here, folks. That's been Nick Lindner. Nick, thanks for sharing your time, your information, your knowledge with us. It's always a pleasure. Fun to tune into some of the stuff you've already released for ice season, and looking forward to seeing a lot more. And welcome to the Ion team. Can't wait to hit the ice with you next.
Yeah, likewise. I'm super jacked. Thanks for having me on.
All right, we'll see you guys again soon. It's been Joel Nelson and Nick Lindner with Ion Ice Fishing Live.